Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nature Aquariums TV, where today we're going to talk all about fertilization, what products to use, what works well for the tank and what doesn't. Before we get on to our video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you can watch other videos like this, and use the comment section below to ask questions, and we'll get right back to you with those answers. All right, so when it comes to plant fertilization, there's so many choices, so much information out there, and so much outdated information that it really makes it confusing as to how to take care of your plants. For primers, plants, their biggest source of issue and frustration for customers is the lack of fertilization and the lack of the right fertilization. Usually most plants can adapt to different light levels. They can adapt to different CO2 levels, water flows, everything else. They're highly adaptable, but they need nutrition to survive. When we talk about nutrition, we're talking about the major components of nutrition, which is nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, plus the trace elements like iron, calcium, boron, and so on. So before we get into it, we've all heard that, oh, phosphates and nitrates are bad, they cause algae. Yes, they can in a tank that doesn't have any live plants. But the plants do need the right ratios of the major components, which is nitrate, phosphate, and potassium. Why do they need them, and what do plants use them for? So nitrogen in the form of nitrate, which is commonly found in your tank, is used for the creation of complex sugars in photosynthesis. So without nitrates, it cannot really produce photosynthesis and really develop and grow the plant. 2, potassium, it is used for the construction of the cells and to grow new tissue matter in the plant. So nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, why do the plants need it? They're more akin to what our bodies need: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. To plants, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium is the same thing. Nitrate, or nitrogen, as is commonly found nitrates in an aquarium tank, is used for photosynthesis. It pulls the nitrogen and the oxygen there to produce complex sugars and to feed the plant. Potassium is for growth and cell wall. In other words, when you see a plant that has yellowing leaves, it has holes in the actual leaf, people think that it's a fish eating them. No, it's the plant actually reabsorbing its own nutrients to pull the potassium out there so it can regrow new tissue closer to the light. And phosphate is the growth indicator. Without phosphate, there is very little to no growth in the plant. And the way phosphate works, it's the stimulant that actually, it's like the gasoline in your engine that gives it, the oomph and for the engine to run. Phosphate is needed for plants to actually grow. So it is important to make sure that in your filter you don't have any phosphate absorbing media or any nitrate absorbing media, as those are robbing critical nutrients for the plants. The second part are called micronutrients. And micronutrients are like your vitamins that you would take, a multivitamin pack. It's not your main source of nutrition, but it helps overall with the plant health and coloration, and it helps it with a lot of its functions. And micronutrients are things like iron, calcium, manganese, boron, and so many of these other trace elements, but they are trace elements and should be dosed in very small amounts. Excess amounts of that can lead to algae growth, because the algae is going to be using whatever nutrients it can find. Now we know why we need nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. We now know why we need the microelements. How do we get them to our plants? And in the previous video that you can see and the link after this video, plants are going to need either root fertilization, or they're going to need water fertilization, or they're going to need both. So how do we get the nutrients in there? Well, there's a lot of competitors out there, and there's a lot of bottles when you go to your favorite store, when you shop online, and everybody claims that they're all complete and they do this and they do that. And there's 2 schools of thought in plant fertilization. One of them is that they're going to give you just the trace elements, and they're assuming that your tank has the majors in there. Now this dates back to fertilization methods from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This was created because back then our tap water was filled with more higher TDS, which means total dissolved solids. Our water, city water, wasn't as clean as it is today. And back then, water came in out of the tap with a lot of phosphate and a lot of nitrate. So therefore, when you did your water changes, you're already adding phosphates and nitrates to the tank. So some of these fertilizers had some potassium in there and a lot of trace elements that were missing from the water. It also assumed that you have a heavy fish load, and with the heavy fish load, with the nitrogen cycle, you're creating lots of nitrate. Lastly, a lot of the food from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s used, and even today, some of the lesser brands or some of the very popular brands use a lot of phosphate as a preservative in food. So therefore, when you're feeding with your flake food, you're adding a lot of phosphates. And that's where those fertilizers kind of fit in there, because it's just one piece of the overall puzzle. Well, let's fast forward to 2023, 2024 if you're watching this video next year, is that our tap water is a lot cleaner than it used to be. The levels of nitrates and phosphates are much lower. Two, a lot of people are now feeding more frozen foods, they're feeding more higher quality foods, and they're noticing their fish health, their coloration come very vibrant, but those foods have less phosphate in them. Some of them actually, like Sarah foods, have no phosphate in them whatsoever. So now where's the phosphate going to come in from? Well, it's not coming in from the tap water, it's not coming in from the food, and it's not coming in from your all-in-one that you find at your local pet chain store. And that's where the fertilization problem starts rearing its ugly head. And what we see is a trend that people try some of these common popular fertilizers out there that don't have the rest of the macronutrients. At first they use it, the plants kind of perk up, they look good for about a month or two, and then algae starts coming around. And that's because the plants used up all the available nitrate and phosphate, and so the plants go a little bit dormant. They'll still look great, they'll be nice and green, but they're not going to grow and outcompete the algae. Algae spores, on the other hand, are seeing all these extra nutrients that are coming in from that incomplete fertilizer and are latching onto that and using the available light and the available nutrients in the tank, and therefore you get an algae bloom. This is where the modern all-in-one fertilizers come into place. And something like Aquarium Co-op Easy Green, which we like a lot, was designed with the modern day water requirements and plant requirements. So it already comes in with the right ratio of nitrates, phosphates, and potassium in there, plus the trace elements, and it doesn't have copper, so if you have shrimp, you're not going to have an issue with your shrimp. Those usually in today's water systems do much better than the old school partial or just trace element fertilizers. There's another very common fertilizer from Seachem, which you see the Flourish, very popular, but it is only a trace. They're actually expecting for you to dose separate nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium along with their Flourish. Therefore, if you're adding the right ratios of nitrate, phosphate, and potassium, plus their Flourish, it'll give you the right results like an all-in-one like Easy Green will do. The only problem with that is that it's now 4 bottles that you have to deal with. You're going to have to figure out how much to add of each, and it becomes a little bit more difficult, whereas an all-in-one like Easy Green, you're just putting in 1 or 2 pumps, however you need for your tank. Lastly, let's talk about root fertilization. Once again, through the roots, you need to add your nitrate, phosphate, potassium. A lot of the common off-the-shelf root tabs are designed that you have already nitrates and phosphates into your tank, so they're trace elements, and you're starving out your swords out of critical potassium, nitrate, and phosphate that they need. Something like the Aquarium Co-op Easy root tabs, they have all the nutrients in there. I will say something to the effect that swords are very heavy iron feeders. If you have a lot of swords, I would recommend picking up something from Aquario, which is a wonderful Korean company. They have iron only tabs, and what's nice with them, they actually make potassium only tabs and they make trace only tabs, so you can actually mix and match them and add whatever your plants may be deficient in. All in all, that's what covers the fertilization. To recap, you need to feed your plants the basic nutrition, which is nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. Make sure they're in the right ratios. There are certain ratios. Good companies like Easy Green, they actually follow the right ratios in there. If you're a more advanced aquarist, you can then buy the individual nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, dose them to your needs, knowing and after testing your water. 2, rooted plants do need to have the right nutrition from the substrate. You got to make sure you feed them there as well. Before I finish the segment, I want to talk about something that's products that have been around for a long time, and due to labeling they can be a little bit misleading. And these are products that they're called liquid carbon. They'll say CO2, liquid CO2. Well, there's really no way to put carbon dioxide in the liquid form. For those of you with a little bit of chemistry, high school chemistry background, you remember that carbon dioxide, the only way it can be liquid is to freeze it to minus 330 degrees. Not very practical, and you're not going to put that into your fish tank. So these products that they call liquid carbon dioxide or liquid CO2, they're algicides. And the way they work is they strip away the biofilm off the leaves surfaces so the leaves can take in the available CO2 that's in the tank a little bit more readily. You got to be careful with them. They are very strong, and some plants and fish and shrimp are sensitive to it. I best recommend using them for spot treatment of certain things, of certain algae. You got to be careful with them, like I said, because they're not CO2. They are a algicide, and you should use them with caution. Also, make sure that you take care of yourself when using them, because they can be an irritant to your bronchial and nasal passages. Well, guys, this kind of sums it up. At the end of the video here, make sure that you use the comment section to ask any questions you may have. I'll provide links in the comments, in the description, to how you can get all these products from us. We ship them throughout the United States, or you can find them at our store. We're always here to answer all your questions. I want to thank you for watching as always. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful day, guys.